Training camp for the New Orleans Saints just started this week, and while there's a lot of positives and exciting things to talk about, we need to discuss Kendre Miller's future with the team and whether or not he's actually a viable option with New Orleans, particularly in Clint Kubiak's system, but also because of his injury history. We'll talk about that right here on the Straight Up Saints podcast.
You're listening to the Straight Up Saints podcast.
What's going on, Saints fans? It's Chris Rosvoglu from the Straight Up Saints podcast from Boot Crew Media. And as always, this program is brought to you by Scott Vicknair Injury Lawyers. Who've been injured in any kind of accident, car, truck, 18-wheeler, or hurt offshore. Scott Vicknair handles it all. You give him a call at 504-500-1111 for a free consultation. They'll always fight for the win. So the Saints kicked off training camp on this Wednesday, and while there's exciting things to talk about with the defense and the way Demario Davis looked and how Alvin Kamara was there despite not having a new contract, the biggest takeaway is Kendre Miller suffering a hamstring injury and what that means for his future with the team. And obviously right now in the moment when it's the first day, you don't want to get too hyperbolic about things and say that his time with the Saints is over and that he's a draft bust, because obviously, things change in the blink of an eye in the NFL, particularly when it comes to injury concerns. Some guys stay injured their whole careers. Some others figure it out. For Kendre Miller, though, the history of the last about year and a half for him hasn't really been ideal. So he was great at TCU. He was durable at TCU. And then he has the knee injury, which keeps him out of the college football playoff, and particularly in the national championship game. TCU obviously gets rout by Georgia. And then with the Saints, there's a lot of excitement. He looked pretty good in camp. He talked about beating Alvin for the job, which obviously was never going to happen, but you love the mentality from the rookie. And then he only plays in 8 games. He missed a lot of time. And I think what was really frustrating is, although he missed 8 games, the final game of the season against the Atlanta Falcons, you see him go out there and you see him have 70 yards. You see him get a touchdown, and there's explosiveness to the way he runs. And he's one of those guys that can be a 2-cut running back, not just a 1-cut guy. And I think for New Orleans, there is that excitement there, particularly in a system like Kubiak's, where you're going to prioritize running the football. You're going to prioritize taking the pressure off your quarterback. But you can't do that if you're not on the field. And in Kendre Miller's case today, when you start training camp and you suffer a hamstring injury and you're in a new system, you're behind everyone now. Everyone else is practically up to speed or getting up to speed while you're sidelined. And I know that it's boring and exhausting hearing that the best ability in the NFL is availability, but in this particular case, it is, especially at the running back position where it's such a physical toll that you take. I just don't see how this magically gets better for him. Obviously, he has to take care of his body. And more importantly, it's one thing for me to say it as someone who considers myself a fan of this team to be frustrated. Dennis Allen came out today, and it's the first day of training camp. You can take it easy on your players. You can decide to not call them out. He says he's a player who needs to figure out how to stay healthy because you can't make the team in the training room. So if you're going to publicly call out a player and it's the first day of training camp, there's obviously frustration there. And from Dennis Allen's perspective, I totally get it. I think it's a little odd because, again, day one, that's a strong statement to make. But it's worth putting out there. And obviously, for Kendre's sake, you're not going to be the number 1 guy. That's Alvin, regardless of his contract situation. Number 2 spot, probably Jamal Williams at this rate if he's not going to be healthy. And the number 3 spot, I think, this is fascinating, and I know fans don't want to hear this, but Jordan Mims, who, by the way, is a former Fresno State guy, played with Jay Kaner in college, he is the type of player that can make plays in the receiving game, and maybe that will appeal to Kubiak. And if he's on the field and Kendre Miller's not, who do you think is going to get the edge in that regard? So, again, it's early, but this is not what you want for Kendre Miller. It's just not, especially when you're talking about him going into year 2 and feeling like he could be a breakout player and maybe give them a little bit of juice in the backfield. That's not going to be the case if he's not healthy. And again, I know it's early, guys. There's so much time for him to figure it out and really get back on track, but this is not what you want to hear. As for other stuff regarding the Saints, regarding training camp, obviously another big focus would be Alvin Kamara reporting, which I mentioned at the top of this video. Alvin's situation is fascinating. I think both sides know that they're in this rare situation where either one can play their cards in either direction, and I would think it's justifiable regardless. If you're Alvin and you want more money and you're doing a hold-in, all right, you're kind of at that stage in your career where you're going to be 29, you want one last payday, I get it. On the other hand, if you're Alvin and you know your production hasn't been great the last 2 years, but you're in a system where you feel like you can really, really maximize your talents and play a lot better, then yeah, I think it makes sense for him to say, okay, let's go out there, show what I can do. And if the Saints aren't going to pay me, someone else will. And from the Saints perspective, do you want to pay a running back who's aging? I get that. On the flip side, do you want to keep one of the veteran voices in the locker room, a guy that he deserves to be a Saint for life? And I don't know if that will happen. It's so hard to do in today's age of sports, sticking with the same team your whole career. But Alvin is a big part of their culture. So it goes both ways. But either way, Alvin is going to be a focal point in Kubiak's offense. He's obviously going to be the lead back. And Saints are going to need him maybe more than they expected. If Kendre Miller can't play and he's not healthy, and that seems to be the case for him the last 2 years, not ideal for New Orleans. But we'll see what happens with like day one of training camp. There's so much more that's going to go on, both good and bad. I'd say today, probably more good than bad, right? Alvin reports Chase Young gets a little work in, and if Chase Young's healthy, that gives your defensive line a little bit more energy and much more firepower, which they need, because similar to Kendre Miller, the Saints have a lot of defensive ends that just can't see the field right now. So we'll see how this all plays out. Main story, though, Kendre Miller already injured. Maybe it's time to give up that stock if you have him. I thought he was a guy that you could look into year 2 as an exciting player. He still very well could be that guy, but now his process is going to be in a little bit of a setback, and I'm fascinated to see how fast it takes him to get back on the field. And from Dennis Allen's standpoint, how much more patience we have with a player, though, that's only played 8 games so far, missed 9 last year, and already gets hurt the first day of training camp. So it's going to be really interesting now. They'll see how that all plays out. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section below, and I'll get back to you. And as always, make sure to stay tuned for more content from the Straight Up Saints podcast, the destination for the Who Dat Nation.